Apple has just wrapped up WWDC. They've announced their next generation software that's going to power all of their devices coming September, and it's a little bit different this time. Instead of the iOS 19, tvOS 19, let me get this right, Mac OS 16, Watch OS 12, and Vision OS 3 that you would expect. Everything is just now 26 with a complete visual overhaul to each. Software is aligned with each other and is all inspired by glass and transparency. But here's the thing, Apple is not in a great place right now. Last year was all about Apple Intelligence. They overpromised. They underdelled. The year before was Vision Pro, which did not create the change I think they thought it would. iOS 18 was like the buggiest Apple software I've ever used. Siri is falling further and further behind as an assistant, and developers just seem to be increasingly frustrated working with Apple. So, is this new software actually fixing Apple's issues, or is it just a shiny coat of paint to try and cover them up? So, the first software they talked about is the new iOS 26. They talked about how this is the biggest redesign since iOS 7 back in the day. So I was amping myself up for like a completely new look, and then they revealed it, and it was not that big of a change. Now, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think this liquid glass material that they've introduced is really cool to look at. Like, I think it looks futuristic, and seeing it across the camera app, the Safari, the way that the tab bar is now more dynamic and kind of disappears into this small bubble is pretty clearly the more immersive experience compared to what we have now. And you can tell that Apple has really tried to not make this just look flat. They're really like iOS 7. There's people for a future that is all about spatial computing, like the Vision Pro. The thing is, though, glass can be problematic. Like, you don't want it everywhere. There were a couple of instances at the event, and I'm sure there will be many in person where you start to see how things might be a little bit less clear. Ironically, I feel like these new all-clear icons are a pretty good example of that. They are cool. They just feel like a recipe for intense squinting. It's actually really weird. Like, this whole transparency thing is probably the first time that Apple has moved design language in a way that it doesn't feel like others will follow. We've actually just seen a whole load of companies go in the complete opposite direction. So ironically, for an event that's designed to help developers, this will probably end up with quite a few of them pulling their hair out trying to figure out how on earth to redesign their app for a second time just to fit Apple's new design language. Now, there are positives like the camera app. I'd say to the phone app, there's a more unified layout which brings together your favorites and your recents and your voicemails. There's the ability for your phone to screen calls before unknown numbers can get to you. Yes, finally, but this one's actually really sick. Hold assist, which means when someone puts you on hold, your iPhone can keep your spot in line, and then it's only when you reach the front of the queue that your phone will ring you as you get through to a person, as if that person was calling you. So much less time nervously hanging around your phone as you try to go about your day. Messages now have customizable backgrounds which appear for everyone in the conversation you've. But then, okay, Vision OS, this is where all the glass came from. This is technically only the third version of Vision OS, but now it's Vision OS 26, and there's some smaller updates to this one. But I think the new widgets, even though they're kind of silly and not really that functional, I think they're awesome. I think they're super cool. Basically, you pin these things to persistent locations and customize the size and depth and color of them exactly how you want. So they showed things like clocks and weather widgets and picture frames. But then they have these like really convincing location pinning, plus all the reflectivity and depth that they always have. I don't know, I thought it was super cool. I was sold, but really, this is also pinned with the fact that Vision OS or the Vision Pro will remember where you put your windows now all the time, like through a reboot, and everything which it didn't do before it was one of my biggest complaints I talked about in the original Vision OS review. So yes, it will remember where you put your windows and where you put your widgets. The updated fidelity of the personas also was it's inevitable. Like we just knew they were going to continually get more and more photorealistic, so they showed another pretty big jump. Not sure if you're going to have to do another scan to get the updated persona, but either way looks much better and less cartoon ghosty. And there's also they added PlayStation VR 2 since controller support, which no doubt will be much better for some of the more precise controls in certain games. There's also a new Jupiter environment, so you're on one of Jupiter's moons with Jupiter in the sky above you. Cool. They also added native 360 video support, but not a ton. But then the biggest, most interesting update of the day by far to me was iPad OS 26. This was fascinating because, every iPad Pro video for the last 6 years or however long, it's been as always said the same thing. It's great. It's amazing hardware. It's very powerful, but it's still an iPad, meaning it's still going to have lots of limitations, and we never really expect Apple to add those really computer-like extra features because they make computers too. Why they're a business. They're not going to cannibalize their own products. They're not going to overlap that stuff. So there's iPads and then there's computers. But with this update, I feel like they use the word game changer, which they use that word all the time. But I actually feel like this genuinely fit the bill because they added things, multitasking, file management things straight from the Mac. So yes, it still has the liquid glass. Of course, it has the new phone app, the new lock screen, all the new icons and widgets and all that. But then this whole new multitasking and multi-win system, where in any app you could just grab that handle in the bottom right corner and shrink it in and make the app whatever size you want immediately to a floating window. And then you can just start stacking floating windows and putting them side by side and messing around with window management very, very freely. I'm sure there's a limit to how many windows you can have open. I got as many as 4 open at the same time. But not only that, they added this 3-dot window control to the corner of each window, the stoplights that we have straight from the Mac, so you can minimize or change the shape of any app, just like on a Mac.